Thank you for joining me today for this. I think it's the last breakout session of Imagine. Hopefully it'll be a nice, gentle one. I won't throw too many bits of information at you, and we'll have some time for some questions at the end. So I'm going to do a presentation today on planning and delivering a successful Magento 2 upgrade from a Magento 1 base, and sort of how we started doing it many years ago, what we do now, and what we learned along the way. So that's me. I'm Thomas Day. I'm the Managing Director of Screen Pages, and there are my contact details if you would like to get in contact with me about anything. I'll put those up again at the end. And this is what I'm going to cover today. So a little bit more of an introduction about who I am and who Screen Pages are, what I'm going to cover today, and then we'll get into the detail of it with how we go about scoping, solution architecture, a little bit about development, testing and training, launching a site, and then what happens after that. So we'll start with who I am. So my name's Tom Day. I'm a managing director. I started in e-commerce in October 2005, actually on the 5th of October 2005, which is also the day that the Twilight novel was first published. And out of the two of us, I'd like to think one of us has made a bigger impact on the world than the other. Over that time, I've been, 13 and a half years, I've been an account manager, business development manager, project director, client services director, and finally in the last sort of 18 months, I'm a managing director. The longest period of that was spent being a project manager, so working for Screen Pages, delivering projects. That was about sort of 9.5 years in roughly the middle of that. And in that time, I'm lucky enough to have worked with 300 brands on building Magento 1 and Magento 2 websites. And I'm actually certified in M1 and M2 as a solution specialist, both while I was doing project management, not since I did the more important job of managing director. Screen Pages is the agency I'm lucky enough to work for. We're a UK-based Magento professional partner. We've got a long track record in delivering websites for lifestyle, fashion, B2B customers. We've also dealt with a lot of charities in the UK, but our portfolio is quite wide and diverse. We've got customers, although they're UK-based, they have operations here in the States, across Europe, New Zealand, Israel, pretty much everywhere around the world, China, Hong Kong, and they're all attempting to obviously do the same thing, get the best sort of bang for their buck out of Magento. In that, we've got developers and project managers and things like that certified on Magento 1 and Magento 2, and in the 1997 to 22 years we've been building websites. We've built over 400 in total, and 250 of those on Magento since 2008. So we've got a lot of experience of doing what we do. We're quite sort of an old player in the Magento e-commerce marketplace. Quick show of hands in the room. Who here is from the merchant side? Okay, so a few of you, developers, technical side, technology partners, any of those in the room? And finally, anyone I've personally invited here to make it look as busy as possible, to whom I now owe a beer? 1, 2, okay, fine, that's good. Those numbers are all right. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm actually going to spend most of my time talking about the first one of those bullet points. As with everything, plan it out right, and it's much easier to get the right result at the end. So we'll talk about how we go about scoping out a Magento 2 project if the customer's using Magento 1. I'll talk about how we architect the project, a little bit about how we develop, sort of migrate data from M1 to M2 and test, how we do training, and then what happens sort of with live and after go live. One of the things I would say is that actually this is our process. It's not perfect, it's not finished, it wasn't the same 6 months ago, it won't be the same in 6 months' time. This is just kind of collectively what we've learned about doing Magento upgrades over the last sort of 3.5 years. So as I said, the first part of the presentation is on scoping the upgrade. So most of our customers, we've been talking to them about Magento 2 for 3 years, pretty much since 2.1. About half of them have moved across, and we've still got the other half to sort of move now. Generally, the conversation starts with all right, well, quote us on whatever we have at the moment. It seems like a sensible starting point, but it comes with a couple of problems. It ignores all of the sort of industry and platform innovation that have happened since the Magento 1 site went live, and that can be 3, 4, 5, or even more years ago in some cases. It assumes that the user's expectations, your customer's expectations, are going to be the same as they were all of those years ago. And it also assumes that your business goals are the same as they were. And that's very unlikely. Business goals change, and the new website should be designed with all of those things in mind. So there's a couple of reasons that happens. Generally, we found probably the most pressing amongst those is time. A Magento 1 site, if you go back all the way to sort of version 1.2, may have been in operation now for 11 years. It's unlikely, but some of them are quite old. And the likelihood of the people being involved in running your Magento website now being involved for that entire time and having a good memory and a good record of everything that's gone into the site is going to be relatively slim. Also, we make our money off keeping sort of really good records of what our customers have asked us to do so that we can reuse that in future. Generally, we found that merchants are happy to let us do that. Now, if we're the agency that built the Magento 1 site, that's brilliant because we know what was asked for originally, we know everything that's come along since then, and we can sort of include all of that in what we're doing for the Magento 2 site. Magento is quite easy to move around, so we've got lots of customers we're talking to Magento 2 about now where we didn't build the site originally, and they don't really have a good kind of record of what's in it. So, it's a task to do, and if you are lucky enough to have records of everything, it's very easy. If you're not, then it's a bit of time to spend sort of doing. But is this approach useful, given the fact that it's basically just a list of everything you've got up till now? Is it useful? And there are arguments for and arguments against. On the pro side, it does give you a kind of final checklist to make sure that your final launched Magento 2 site includes everything you have now, or that you're going to specifically exclude something from that Magento 2 site. It gives, as a merchant and as an agency, it gives you a starting point for defining a budget. If you basically add up everything you spent on the original build and everything you've spent in every sort of piece of work you've done from then on, it's not going to be more than that. Obviously, that gives you a slightly overinflated budget because chances are you'll have gone back over the lifespan of your Magento 1 site and touched the same area and tweaked it and changed it. The product page is a great example. It's very unlikely that it's the same product page you launched with all those years ago. And it gives you a real chance of, we've always had it. So we'll carry it forward because we don't know whether we might use it. And I've got sort of a good example of that later of a client that sort of we had to sort of dissuade from doing that. So by way of illustration, this is an actual extract from, so we have a change tracking system that we sort of record all of our customers' requirements in. This is one of our Commerce Edition customers in the 6 years they ran their Magento 1 site. This is the number and the relative complexities of the changes they made, or that we did for them. And if you're sort of having to kind of go through and count up and calculate all of the effort that involved in that, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of effort, that's a lot of hours. And I said, in some cases, there'll be repetition of work in some of those sections. So it's not great as a scope, but it is great as a checklist to make sure that you've included everything the customer might need, everything that you might need when they're building the 2 site. So we found, since doing our first Magento 2 from Magento 1 build about 3.5 years ago, that it's best to approach it as if you don't know the agency, if you don't know your agency, as if this is the first piece of work that you're doing with them. So start like you would start with a new agency. Give yourself a sort of, give your agency, what your business goals are for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years so that they can understand what you're trying to achieve out of the website. How are you going to measure that? What are your KPIs going to be? How frequently are you going to measure performance against them? That gives them the best chance of being able to deliver a solution that delivers your business goals and is not just let's start from where we got to on Magento 1. That obviously, if you're, most businesses have, sort of set goals, but if you are working with an agency that you've been working with for a while, they can help you define some of those. They will know what historic growth you've had, what problems you've come across, which bits of work went well and which bits of work didn't. And that can all feed into sort of the KPIs and the business goals for the new website. That can be done, we do that sort of face-to-face. If the customer doesn't really know how to sort of start putting their requirements together, that we get them into a meeting, we get their major stakeholders into a meeting room, we sit down with them for a day and we just throw ideas around and we understand what's gone well, what's not gone well. Again, like we would do if we were working with a new customer, we do that same process to kind of, I suppose, reacquaint ourselves with the customer. Obviously, a Magento 2 project's really important. Sometimes it can be a bit difficult depending on how busy your major sort of stakeholders are to get them into a room. And if that's the case, ask your agency whether they've got kind of a checklist, just something that you can sort of run down very quickly and just sort of mark things that you might want. You know, obviously that can sort of go hand in hand with the functional checklist that sort of they put together from everything that's been done on the site before. And again, it's just a way of sort of starting to put down an edge to what you need from your Magento 2 site. Again, this is an actual document that we send out to customers where they don't really know sort of how, you know, this is one of the pages where they don't really know what languages and currencies they want to sort of trade in. So this is a way of starting to capture a little bit of that, but also give them a little bit of information about how Magento 2 works. And actually this is basically kind of like a version of our quote sheet where we've taken all the prices out. Because at this stage, we want the customer to sort of give us their requirements without worrying about, well, that one's very expensive, so I won't do it that way. Let's start with the requirements, and then we'll work to a sort of budget from that. Magento 2, it's a very different platform in some respects from Magento 1. There's obviously been 10 or 11 years worth of investment between the version that was first sort of commercially viable in the UK and sort of around the world and what you sort of build on now. So get your agency to show you, give you a walkthrough, give you a demo of Magento 2. Because it's different. You know, the admin panel is very different, the user interface is different. And even though it's easier, and arguably it's much better in some cases, it is different. And you as the merchants, you'll need to understand how those differences will work with what you do day to day. So once you've kind of, let your agency in on what the business goals are for the new website, and you've kind of understood sort of how the admin panel might be different, that might just be a half an hour or an hour walkthrough. You don't need to go through sort of everything in detail. You're not trying to train the customer at this stage. That starts to let you narrow down on a scope. So ideally, if you're working with an agency that does things as we do, they'll be able to give you that kind of scope in a way that you can see the individual efforts from each element. So each line item will have a cost or an effort, and from that you'll be able to determine which bits are easy, which bits are difficult, and start to decide whether each of those pieces of functionality is going to be useful enough for you in the new site to include it. There can be a bit of a temptation to throw everything in this, particularly if you're working from we've got all these things ticked on our current site, so we need to make sure that we include them. But, this is the point where you should really consider if there's lots and lots and lots and it doesn't fit into your budget or your time, the phasing. So phase things out. Maybe don't put everything in. We had a customer, by way of example, who, when they bought their Magento 1 site, they're a charity in the UK that deal with sort of historic buildings, and they had this idea of you being able to sort of adopt part of a building, so a chimney or a fireplace or a doorway, kind of like you would adopt a sort of an endangered animal, but much less exciting. And they spent a lot of effort and a lot of time thinking about this, putting it into their original M1 build sort of 6 years ago. By the time they got to the end of the M1 build, they hadn't really had time to sort of populate it with content or make it actually work, and then it just kind of fell by the wayside. And even when we got around to sort of defining their Magento 2 build with them, it came up with well, do we need to include this? And we were like, oh God, no. This has been 6 years and you've never used it. This is time to sort of let it go. And if it comes back up, then we'll figure out a way of doing it in Magento 2. This is a good opportunity. Magento, we're lucky in the fact that it is so well supported from a sort of the ecosystem of extensions and third-party providers. Your agency is probably going to have a set of agencies or set of extensions that they've worked with before, because they'll have had to deliver requirements for other people. And the extensions, the apps that you can plug into Magento allow you to deliver much greater value than the effort of installing them. If you were to try and deliver these things yourself, it'd be very time-consuming, very complicated, and very costly. And the third-party providers allow you to get much better sort of bang for your buck. They may have some that they don't like working with because they have had not brilliant experiences with them in the past. That's unfortunately true, although the quality of extensions is getting much better. But where you can find a sort of third-party system that delivers one or more of your requirements, it allows you to use more of your budget as a merchant on doing the fun stuff that isn't out of the box, that is a bit more bespoke, that's going to be a differentiator for you versus your competitors. So we like most agencies, we've got our, I suppose, sort of friendly agencies. Here's a sort of friendly third parties. Here's a sample of the ones that we work with. And again, if there's anyone in the room who's not on this list, I do apologise. I'll add you to the beer list from earlier. So we know that if a customer has a complex product catalogue or they have a large product catalogue, they're going to need a search solution. As much as I'd like Magentos to be better, it's not the world's most brilliant. So we know that that's a really good client to introduce to Clevu. If they've got complex payment requirements or they've got someone who wants payment flexibility, then it's a good introduction to Klarna. If they're looking at international expansion and want to do sort of localized payments, then Adyen are a great company to introduce them to. And if their delivery methods are sort of complicated now or they're going to be in future, Shipper HQ it's a safe pair of hands. We can introduce them to them and they can take on board that client, work out their requirements and recommend a solution that we know will work. Pretty much every Magento 1 and Magento 2 site we've ever built has been integrated with one or more back office systems. And you're going to need to maintain those integrations as part of a Magento 2 build. They become critical to your business being able to operate at the scale it does. Now, this can actually, although it's complicated to get right initially, it can be one of the easiest bits to get right as part of a Magento 2 build, because you have a live working example in your M1 site. Hopefully it's working, hopefully it's not broken. So again, this allows you to focus more of your effort on the new stuff you're delivering, the novel changes, novel requirements that you're going to introduce as part of the new build. One thing that, obviously, as Magento has grown in popularity, sort of ERP system and sort of order management system sort of vendors, those back office providers, have started to write connectors to Magento, because it's a differentiator for them. If you're using Magento, it's easier for you to onboard that. Now, if your site's been around, if your Magento 1 site's been around for a few years, it's possible you weren't using those sort of vendor-supplied extensions because they weren't available. But it might be an opportunity to look at them now, and again, allows you to use more of your budget sort of slightly more sensibly. One thing I would say, and this is a couple of our customers have attempted to do this, is to do a major sort of back office system change at the same time as doing a Magento build. And although it seems like a good idea at the time, what it means is you're trying to change both ends of an integration at the same time, and that means generally things go live much later than they should do. So again, we're actually working with another customer now who did a major sort of ERP order management swap out at the same time we were building their Magento 2 site. And because it had to go live before the Magento 2 site did, and it ran into problems, their Magento 2 launch has slipped by about 6 months. That's not because we're doing anything in those 6 months, it's just it can't go live until the other end of the system that it connects to is in place. That sort of overrun on that other project has meant that by the time their Magento 2 site goes live, it's going to be nearly a year old. The sort of the functionality that was built into it and the designs and the way it links into their business is already going to be more out of date than it could be. What else? So there's one other sort of element that we normally include in scoping, and it's probably worth doing for you. Because Magento 2 does their security updates very differently than Magento 1, it's now you have to sort of take advantage of moving to a later version, a minor version upgrade. Given the fact that your development's probably going to be sort of at least 3 months, that means that there's going to be one minor point release that occurs during the period in which your site's being built. So make time for it, maybe sort of a month or two before go live, just before you go into testing is a good idea, so that when you do go live, you're on the latest version. You don't then have to immediately start sort of patching. So once we know sort of the size and the scope of the build, we can then go into sort of building it. So this is the point where, us with our merchants, we've agreed the budget, and we've agreed sort of the timescales in which the site needs to be delivered. Now we can get into the more fun bit of actually deciding how we're going to do it. So we do that, and this is a great idea with your agencies as well, is to sort of sit down in the room with them, again, with the stakeholders for the project, and go through the scope sheet that you've delivered, that they've sort of provided to you, line by line. Make sure that they show you how it works, make sure they understand what your requirements are so that you can see how Magento does it, how a third party does it. If they've got things they want to show you then, so examples of work, that kind of work that they've done for other people, that's a great sort of opportunity to sort of go through it. And the idea is that sort of at the end of that meeting or meetings, if it's lots of scope and lots of people that need to be involved, is that you've got a good idea of what you're going to get as a merchant at the other end of the project. Do the same for the design as well. Particularly critical if your design or your brand is changing as part of the M2 build. If it's staying the same, again, it's worth revisiting. Is there a better way that it can be captured and represented by the Magento 2 side? Again, get the people who are involved in the design side into that meeting, get the agency's designers, if they're doing the design for you, involved. But also remember in that meeting to keep in mind what's in the functionality. Don't have them go off on sort of completely separate tangents and come up with two completely separate but brilliant ideas that you then have to try and pull back together. And sort of continuing the theme from the scoping side, try to avoid that. We'll just do it like it is at the moment. It can seem easy, it can seem tempting because it's much simpler to sort of ask someone to, well, just give us again what we have. But again, it robs you of that opportunity to take advantage of all of the things that have come about in sort of the platform and in customer expectations more recently. In this meeting, or in these meetings at this sort of phase of the project, this is kind of where the scope can go up and down. So it can change by about sort of 5 to 10% just during these sort of meetings. When you get involved in discussing things in detail and seeing examples, stuff gets added in, stuff gets taken out. Most of the time you add in about as much as you take out, but sometimes it can move by slightly more. So just, again, sort of expect that when you get into the detail of things. Front-end design is obviously an important part, knowing what the site's going to look like. So we start with the site homepage on all the major breakpoints. So we, in our sort of standard design, tend to do two: a small screen mobile at the bottom end, and then a sort of full-size desktop at the top end. And we'll sort of do those as quickly as we can after that design kickoff workshop. We'll present them back to the customer, so actually put them into a tool. This is a tool we use called Marvel, and there are a couple of other alternatives that allow them to sort of see the design sort of in-device, in situ. And you can program in some sort of simple interactions with it to sort of show what happens when you open the menu and you click on the search box and things like that. The agency should come and they should present these ideas to you. This is their vision for your site. Get away or give them away, and this tool provides one of them, giving specific feedback for things they like and they don't like. And make sure that if you have a sort of complicated design sign-off process as a merchant, so maybe the e-commerce team makes the first round of amendments and then the CEO needs to get involved, make sure your agency know that as well, so that when they get sign-off from the first round of sort of people reviewing it, they know what to expect from the second round. And also, if it's time-consuming and they need to get someone, very senior in front of the designs to give final sign-off, and you're going to take time to do that, that they know to factor that into their plans. Sometimes that process goes wrong. Despite everyone's best intentions and everyone coming away from the sort of design kickoff workshop having a really good idea of the fact that the other team understands them really well and everyone's sort of really clear on things, it can go, you can present your designs back to the agency can present the designs back to you, and they're just completely not what you wanted at all. This happens to us. It happens in about sort of 1.5% of our projects. And it's possible that it could happen with yours as well. We worked with a company we were building a site for about 6 years ago, where we went through 15 separate revisions of the homepage. Obviously, that's very time-consuming, and it made sort of big impacts on when we could actually start building the project. But part of the problem we had there is the feedback we were getting wasn't specific. It was, I don't like that, but I'll know it when I see it. That's obviously very difficult for a designer to go away and do something that's more likely to get to the sort of the end requirements with the next version. So if you can be specific, do be specific. Also, if you get, if there's specific things about the designs you don't like or that you've seen examples of from elsewhere, don't be afraid to share those as well, because anything that we can do to understand design is a very personal thing. Anything we can do to understand your sort of feelings about design will help us get to an accurate design as quickly as possible. Luckily, because it's generally the start of the project, there's normally enough time if it does go wrong to get another version across and not have any impact on the timescales. If it does take a little bit longer, then obviously that's going to sort of push out the end launch date of the site. So once the homepage is done, move on to the other pages. You can either do these individually. So we tend to do one for, again, sort of small screen mobile, full screen desktop, for the material, what we call the material pages of the site. So category, product basket, checkout, and if you're having any other pages sort of heavily modified. So you can do these individually. We tend to do these as a bulk because we find that once the home page is agreed, it's much easier to get sign off on all the rest of the pages because the branding is set, the color scheme, the fonts, the size of things is all determined by that sort of home page layout. And again, go through the same process. Go through the process of feedback until you're happy with them, that they contain all the functionality that you need, and you can use your sort of references of functionality as a sort of checklist to make sure that everything's included. Once it's finished, get a final pack. So cut away all the intermediate versions, all of the marked up versions, so that you've got a final set of designs that cover everything the agency is going to build for you. It helps you check things off when they're finished, and it also helps the agency be clear on what they're delivering for you. What you don't want is a design and then 15 sets of sort of nested notes on it, and you have to read the last one and everything in between in order to understand what's wanted. That's going to cause mistakes to be sort of, built into the designs and things like that. Going along with the designs, and probably the less fun bit for everyone, should be a functional specification. So this will be a basically written description that goes along with the designs and covers everything that the agency is going to build for you as part of the project. And it's not uncommon for these things to run to 100 pages or more. The idea being that this has everything in it. If it's not in this document, it's not going to be in the site at the end, so that it's very clear from your side and from the agency side what they need to do to deliver the project. And this should be revised. This shouldn't be a sort of one and done, great, everything's in there, brilliant. We've had customers go through a 40-day build and come back with sort of dozens of rounds of heavy revisions to this document. We prefer that because it means we know they've read it properly. They've sort of understood things in there. They're asking questions. Likewise, we've also had clients go through a 120-day build and not make one single revision. And that just, as an agency, that fills us with horror because it means they probably haven't read it. Because we're human, there's going to be some mistakes in there from the fact that, we've written basically a custom document. So that, if you read through that and you can't see any mistakes, get your agency to walk you through it. That's what we do. If we get something back and there's no feedback, we'll just get them on the phone. We'll go through it with not a fine-tooth comb, but we'll sort of, we'll present it back to them and just say, look, have you made sure you've understood everything in this? Because this is what we're going to go and build for you. And this is then what we give to the developers. So we don't then translate this into another document. We give them the same document that our customer has signed off. So everyone's working from the same information, and the same as the designs as well. Data migration. So you're all using Magento 1, or most of the people in the room are, those who have a Magento site. Magento have built a very comprehensive set of data migration tools. And again, they're, because it's already there and it makes it easier for you, there can be a bit of a temptation to migrate everything across. And what that does is drag everything that's been in your site since day one across to the new M2 site. And that's sometimes not a great idea. As much as we'd like it from an agency side, merchants don't go around deleting old products they don't need, deleting old content pages, old content blocks, old promotions. They don't clear the site up as much as they could. So if you migrate everything using the data migration tools, you end up almost sort of clogging the Magento 2 site up before it's even started. So what we do is we discuss with our customers which data we're going to migrate across as is, which data we're going to let them basically re-input just the stuff they need, and which we're going to sort of do a hybrid approach. So we find that generally things like customers' orders, invoices, credit memos, that sort of stuff is migrated across one-to-one. We take across everything there because it's important that all the customers and all their old orders are through there. Stuff that we generally, our customers do through the admin panel when they get into testing is things like promotions, content blocks, content pages, some elements of the sort of the site design configuration, because there can be an awful lot of history there, and generally that allows you to take advantage of the new features in Magento 2, so like page builder and other elements like that, new promotion types, and sort of tie everything into all of the sort of the scheduling tools that are in Magento. So, I mean, that we can do, sometimes we'll do that for our customers, but generally that's sort of something that they're happy to do themselves with our, obviously, guidance and assistance. And then things like product data and URL rewrites, we tend to do that as sort of a hybrid. So we'll pull that out of Magento 1 into Excel sheets, and then we'll give that to the customer, and we'll walk through them how to fill that out. Because Magento 1 and Magento 2 work differently, it's an important sort of element of the training. And it means that they can cut away old products and old attributes that they no longer need. They can add in and supplement it with new data and new products that are being launched with the new site. And they can make sure that everything's correct. So, if you're using smaller product images, it's an opportunity for them to provide the larger product images that the new site will use. And URL rewrites, we sort of do the same with. So integration, so as part of the sort of specification, obviously, it's important to sort of detail how the website is going to be integrated with other business systems. This in itself can be a 50, 60, 70-page document for a site that's sort of heavily integrated. But like the sort of functional specification and like the designs, it should include everything that's going to be built by the agency. Now here's an opportunity to sort of, if the backend system provider you're using now has a Magento connector, then it might mean that you aren't writing the integration yourself. You're just installing that connector, letting them configure it, and sort of going from there. If you are going to write the integration, then it should be clear. It should state things like, so if your agency is writing the integration, sorry, then it should clearly state things like the frequency, how the data is exchanged between the two systems, down to the individual field level, the logic that's performed on them, and who's responsible for sort of monitoring and reporting errors, so that the merchant, you guys know where errors are going to come from. If a product doesn't import because it can't find it, who's going to be notified about that? And so one of the things it should also state is who's got responsibility for the data and process at each step. So there's a point where data gets handed over from one system to another, and beyond that, it's then sort of you can't really do much monitoring on it. So clearly state who has that. And this, like every other document, should be signed off by you and your agency and the third-party system provider. It probably was when it was built for the Magento 1 site. It should be sort of recertified again, because there's an opportunity to identify if anything has changed or needs updating. Very quickly, I'll talk about development. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, because this is something that is almost sort of individual to every agency. The general sort of steps that we take are these. So we'll start by setting up the hardware on which the site's going to run finally. And that means when we do any testing, we can test it against live hardware. So we can pick up on things like configuration or performance issues without having to do all that in sort of a pretend environment and then deploy and sort of retest and recertify on live hardware. Then we'll configure the Magento core functionality that's required. Because generally not all of our sites use all of the functionality that's there, but we know how it's going to be configured. Then we'll purchase and install all of the third-party extensions that the project's going to use. The reason we do that so early is because it allows us to find any conflicts between those extensions. If we're installing two things that get involved in the checkout, for example, they can have conflicts and they can not work nicely together, and it gives us as much chance to solve those in a way that's compatible with the rest of the project and the rest of the project timeline. So we'll install all those and then we'll test to make sure that they work as we need them to. One other thing to note is that a lot of third-party extensions, they do change how they work between the Magento 1 version and the Magento 2 version. So just like the admin panel has been rewritten, the M2 version of an extension may be different from the M1 version of extension. Even though it's got the same name, it's designed as a replacement, it might not have carried through all the same things that we're used to. So if there is an opportunity there to get sort of a walkthrough from your agency of how the site works with the extensions in it, definitely take it up. We'll then do the data migration testing. And the integration testing. Before we've sort of done anything with the front end of the site, we'll get those two things done. And the reason being is because integration is generally one of the more critical elements of the project in order to get right. And if we've done the data migration testing, we then have 3, 4, 5 years of historical orders, historical customer records on which to stress test that integration. We don't have to rely on the customer getting in and putting a whole load of test orders in sort of towards the end of the project. We can get ahead of that and do testing much earlier. Then we'll go into the overall sort of theme testing, theme build and theme testing, and then any custom functionality and testing of that. And then when we've put that all together, we'll do end-to-end testing just ahead of handing it over to the customer. So reporting, obviously your agency will be telling you how things are going. They'll be sharing with you probably on a weekly basis, maybe more frequently than that, about the fact that the project is going well and it's going to time. But generally in a project, you've got to provide some stuff as well. So you've got to provide product data or content, promotions, delivery methods, things like that. And it's important to keep the agency informed of how you're doing against those things. Because again, their project plan will assume that you will be able to deliver all those items on time. And if you're having difficulty doing, the product data is always the most time-consuming task, because it's sometimes many thousands or tens of thousands of SKUs. So if that's overrunning, let the agency know so that they can factor it in, or they can give you some more assistance. Probably the best or worst example, depending on your point of view, of that is a customer for whom we built a clothing website. And the person they tasked with creating all of the product data, and this wasn't actually a Magento 1 customer, we were building them onto Magento 1 at the time, and their previous e-commerce platform couldn't export the data in bulk, and they gave the job to someone who was working on the shop floor. So in between serving customers, just underneath the counter, they had a laptop that they were typing in product data, and they had to stop every time a customer came in. And it took them 12 months to do all their product data. So that's 12 months while we as an agency were sitting around twiddling our thumbs. And that means that when the site went live, it was already a year and a half old. So if that is happening, obviously don't give it to a person who's also got 12 other jobs to do as well. But make sure that your agency is aware of that so that they can, they can plan in. There might be something they can do to help you sort of get that done. Luckily, as we're all migrating from Magento 1 to Magento 2, Magento 1's got brilliant migration tools built into it, so you won't have that problem, hopefully. Testing and training. So we sort of break up training into a few different areas, which I'm going to cover now. So the first thing we do, and it's quite unusual, we only started doing it sort of in the last couple of years, is we train our customers how to test. So we found just generally sort of working with customers both in builds and updates and things like that, one of the biggest sort of impediments to a testing phase running well from a customer point of view is how they test. We generally find that they'll just go and look around the site, they'll notice some sort of layout issues, maybe a button's not quite a right color, things like that. And that's what will sort of trickle through to your development team, to the agency's development team. Or they are doing a bunch of testing, but they'll only tell you sort of 2 days before launch, and then they'll give you 200 bugs to try and solve. And both of those are obviously frustrating. The first one because they're not testing it properly, and we know that they're not testing it properly. And the second one because there's no way that your agency will be able to process that many bugs that quickly to the required sort of quality level. So yeah, the first thing we do a couple of weeks before the client is actually going to start testing the site is we'll send one of our QA engineers out to take them through the test plan that we've been running internally, but also to teach them how to write a test plan, how to execute a test plan, how to report bugs, and how to explain issues back to us as the agency, so that when we do get things, they're as good a quality as possible. And we have a way of basically finding out how far the customer is through their testing. Just as the project goes into UAT, we'll then start with a sort of standard, almost a driving test for Magento. So we'll take the customer through the standard elements of Magento, through the admin panel. We'll make sure they're comfortable with the conventions it runs on and how to make changes to it. And then generally a couple of weeks into the sort of the UAT period, we'll do a bespoke testing. So once the client sort of started to use the admin panel and they know which bits they are familiar with and which bits they need more help with, we can put together a sort of bespoke training agenda just for those bits. Maybe it's for different people in the team. Also, as a merchant, work out who needs to know which bits of the admin panel. If you need some people who are going to be sort of admins, get them sort of that all over testing. If you're going to have some people who just do content and promotions or customer service, don't bother taking them through with the agency all of the configuration stuff, because they won't need to know it, and it's just sort of a waste of everyone's time. One of the other things, as soon as possible after you've had your testing, start using it. Magento's complicated, there's lots of things in it, and the quicker you can start using the things that you've been taught, the longer they'll stick around in your head, then the easier you'll find it. So obviously you've been trained, you've been given access to the site, start reporting bugs as quickly as possible. That gives your agency as long as possible to fix them, to get them fixed well, get them tested, recertified by you. Also share, if you have been lucky enough with that testing to write your own test plan, share with them the progress through that test plan that you're making, so that they know whether you found 50 bugs and you're a third of the way through your tests, or you found 50 and you're all the way through your testing. That will allow them to sort of allocate the right amount of resource that they allocate to the project to bug fixing. And just in our experience, about 50% of the things that are raised in that process aren't bugs, they're questions. They're little bits of training that need to be delivered, or I can't quite remember how to do this, or I've broken that bit of the content, can you help me put it right? So when it comes to launch, which is obviously the most exciting bit of a project, make sure that your Magento 1 site has a nicely styled holding page, because you'll need it while you do the data migration in order to make sure that everything comes across correctly. Obviously, give your customers contact details to contact you if the site is going to be down while the site is down, so that you don't lose them completely. Agree a time where it makes sense for you as a business, so not immediately before a big catalog drop or before a major marketing event or something like that. And understand that the agency will have their own time pressures. So launch is a complicated thing, it involves multiple people. Ideally, you'll be able to do it sort of outside the working day, but do it at the start. Don't wait till the end. And also make sure you pause any paid marketing just before and for probably a couple of days after launch as well. And if there are going to be teething problems with a new site, something doesn't work quite as expected, they're going to be found and resolved in those first few days. And if you've paid for people to arrive at site where you know they can't convert, that's sort of a waste of your marketing budget. Post-launch, so into the live operation of a site, again, you're going to come across teething issues. So ask the agency whether they're going to have a team who's familiar with the site and experienced on your build available for the first few days or weeks after it goes live. Obviously, if you've got nothing to report to them, brilliant. But if there are any issues, they're going to be the best people to sort of solve them quickly and solve them efficiently and get the site working again. You'll have picked up, requirements that, because the site build will have taken 3, 4, 5 months, you'll have picked up requirements that you need to then start sort of scheduling in with the agency. So it's a good idea, maybe as you sort of get into testing, to start talking to them about how to plan those out. But also remember that now it's in the hands of your customers. You're going to have requirements come up that you haven't identified and haven't planned in. So have a way with your agency of sort of the really sort of critical customer service things that come up that aren't bugs, that are just changes you want to make, that you have a quick way of delivering those to the agency and then delivering them back into the live site. And start to measure the change in the KPIs that you sort of set way back at the start of the project. There'll normally be a bit of disruption to those, even returning customers coming back to a site that works better. They have a little bit of a flutter because things have changed. So it takes a while for those to sort of settle down, but they should start to improve. And if they don't, you need to start looking at why. And finally celebrate. It's a long project. It will have been time-consuming, incredibly time-consuming from your side, from the agency side. Now is the time to sort of celebrate. Well, now is the time that also the real work starts. But hopefully you'll be a little bit wiser, and if you're anything like me, a little bit more grey in the beard. Thank you. We have got a couple of minutes for questions, if there are any.
Whenever you were talking about UAT as a merchant, where should we draw the line, or where should our expectations be whenever we're seeing bugs? I've been through a few UATs where it feels like we're doing the Q&A.
Yeah.
Doing the quality control. How should we? Where should we draw the line there?
The purpose of UAT, sorry, I'm going to put that down there, is to make sure the site's ready for launch, ready for your customers to start browsing it. I think a good sort of point of delineation between what you and the agency are going to do is if it's content, the agency probably aren't going to know whether that's the right price for that product or the right image. If it's functional, that's something that they should have picked up. So that's probably where I would draw the line. I would spend, obviously it's important that you do your own sort of, functional testing as well as just looking at the content, because you will test it in a way that their QA team won't. You will know the odd customers, the odd orders, the odd promotions that caused you problems on your Magento 1 site. Those are a great source of things to test on your Magento 2 site. But they're not going to know whether that's the right banner or it goes to the right product. So that's the sort of area I'd focus your testing in, and if it's anything functional, that should be the agency's responsibility.
So we've heard some folks that we've talked to here talk about their Magento 2 implementation went well because they tried to minimize changes to the front-end design, the layout, the navigation, the product information. Mm-hmm. You talked about that being a key part of moving. So can you talk about the balance between using this as an opportunity for redesign, especially when everybody's saying they don't like your Magento 1 site, versus the risk that comes with that?
I suppose it depends on two things, really. One, how much time you have and how much budget you have. The closer you keep things to Magento, this is true not just of a new build, but also in the ongoing life of a Magento site. The closer you keep to things like the layout and the functionality that comes out the box, the easier it will be for you to adopt new versions and also to install extensions, because they're all going to assume that your Magento site is out of the box. It's not going to assume that it's been heavily customized over 2 or 3 years. So if your customers will have a certain expectation, I think customers, some of them care an awful lot about what it looks like. Most of them just want it to work well. The ideal website is one that your customers don't really notice. They're focused on the products, the content, the excitement of buying. So anything that you can do to get out of their way, to make it as easy as possible for them to purchase. If you're making a page more complicated to fit into your brand sort of guidelines, that's probably not a good step. It's going to cause it to be difficult for your customers. It's going to cause you headaches in future. It's technical debt that you have to carry through. So I think it's difficult to kind of make one statement, but I think judge everything on its merits. Look at whether it's going to move you towards your business goals or not. And if it's not going to make any impact, then question the use of doing it. That's an opportunity then for sort of split testing with that. Okay, well, let's see whether this page layout versus that one actually makes any difference. Does that answer the question, really? Okay, thank you. I think there's one over there, actually. But
Yeah, so my question is about the cost of the discovery process. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like paid discovery. Also like RFP writing, how does that, like if a client is bringing their pre-written RFP to you, do you still need to go through that process?
So I think, yes, you do. You should still go through that process because the RFP will be written from the customer's point of view. Us as an agency and all agencies, they will have a more standardized way of explaining things to their developers, to their testers, in order to be able to make sure that they deliver the site out the other end. So the likelihood of them just taking your RFP and giving it to the team is going to be relatively slim. You're unlikely to get the right result out at the end of that process. How long that process takes is dependent on really how complex your requirements are. So, we as an agency, it's the scoping process it's a couple of days of total time that we build into the quotes, but it happens over an elapsed sort of 6 weeks while we go through all those meetings. The writing of the specification is a line item that we have, and if the project's very simple, we can step down the effort that we allocate to writing that. If it's a much more complicated one, or it's got 12 different systems that it's integrating with, that document gets longer, and the time we allocate to it gets longer as well. But we break that all down for the customer so that they can see, okay, if we want to do all this integration, it's going to cost us this much in development, but also this much in testing and project management and specification, and that's then an opportunity for them to go, right, is it going to get us the right amount, the required value to be worth investing in? But there are some agencies, we've in the UK, or where I'm most sort of familiar with, where the discovery process will be 3 months and it'll be sort of 15 grand of a project, and that's the way they run projects. And if it's really complicated, that might be appropriate. If it's much simpler, that's probably massive amounts of overkill. Yeah.
When the client has already selected a different design agency or has design resources in-house, how involved are you then in the design process? Like how much feedback are you giving throughout it to catch things that might, cause just aren't critical to the site or cause some type of overrun?
So where we've got customers who work in that way, and we have quite a few who have either an external branding or design agency, or they have designers in-house and they like to sort of, they like to do things personally. We then generally get involved as if we're the customer. So we put ourselves on the other side, and we'll basically, when they come and they present designs to the stakeholders of the project, we'll be there almost as a functional stakeholder. So we'll be there to say, okay, well, that's great, but what does that button do? Or where does that link go? Or how do you get from this page to that page? So that it might be entirely appropriate that the designs they're coming up with are the ones that get built into the site. But it's important that the customer understands relatively simple tweaks from a design point of view can be very costly from a functional, from a time point of view. But it might still be that that's the right thing to do, just make sure they're aware of it. So we sort of swap our role from that side, and we act more like just sort of a person at the customer, a stakeholder who's making sure that things fit into the scope we've already agreed.
Can you talk about project resourcing? So thoughts on the components of the team, how many people are on the team? If you got, is it 1 or 2 Magento developers needed to do this, and is this their full-time job for 3 to 9 months, or they're still doing stuff to the production site? Obviously, you probably need design people, and how many of those? Like, what are some of the ranges you've seen on a successful team? At some point, it's probably too big. At some point, you don't have enough people to do the work.
Yeah, so it's a project team from our size never is really less than 6 people. And that'll be a core of probably 3 developers, so maybe 1 or 2 seniors and one of the sort of the junior team who are working together. There'll be a project manager who's over it full time, obviously a designer who's involved at the start and at the end when they're doing sort of testing. Then we'll have our training teams as well, which might be one of the developers or one of the project managers. So that's kind of the minimum, really. And for the developers, yeah, it's pretty much a full-time job for at least 3 months while they're doing the build, they're working with the internal testing teams, and then they're sort of on hand for the client testing the UAT period. On the bigger side, that can be 1 or 2 designers, it can be 4 or 5 developers, and it can be for 4 or 5 months where they're sort of solidly allocated to it. Generally doesn't take much longer than that, we found. where projects do last longer than that, we tend to get into the fact that the requirements that the customer has when it goes live are very different to what they were when they started the project. So it can be costly to keep reworking things towards the end of UAT. So we try and, if it's pushing the total timescale for the project too far, we'll try and get the customer to phase things out so that we get an initial build done in a reasonable time and can get a product to market and then start adding in the new features. Okay, well, thank you very much. And if you do have any other questions.